Game on Saturday, you heard a coach that is unlike most others. Shane Beamer, during his mid-game interview with CBS, said this about Juice Wells. Juice Wells, receiver for South Carolina. This was during the game, Borky. He's done right now. Think he may have a little bit of a broken bone in the foot. The good news is it's the foot we just did surgery on, so he's got a screw in there that stabilizes it, so there's hope. I doubt he comes back today, but we'll see what happens going forward. What coach does that?
Bizarre.
It is.
After the game, he addressed it again. Yeah, he wasn't able to finish. We're going to let him see a specialist on Tuesday this week and should have a better idea then. I don't think what it is necessarily season-ending. We feel like it's something that he'll be able to play with and we'll know a lot more here on Tuesday. Well, today is Tuesday, and Shane Beamer said in his weekly press conference, Juice Wells is out this weekend. He saw a specialist this morning, and it's not season-ending. They'll continue to monitor it and do what's best for him. Juice Wells has not put up very big numbers this year. He was hurt in the season opener against North Carolina. That limited his playing time. For the season, he's got 3 catches for 37 yards and a touchdown. Now, that touchdown did come against Georgia on Saturday. But dismiss Juice Wells at your own, I guess at your own risk, because last year in 13 games, he had 68 catches for 928 yards with 6 touchdowns, averaging 71 yards a game.
And almost 1,300 yards the year before.
Yeah.
So he's
a really good player.
He's a player. And that one touchdown against Georgia, I mean, he split their defense and ran right past a bunch of people. Electric athlete. During the break, I'd compared him to you, kind of like Judkins, right? Where if you look at his numbers, you're like, he's not really producing. But you know what he is and what he can do and probably will do at some point. And you hate to put it like this, but it's just reality. It's a fortunate situation for Mississippi State that he won't be doing it against them.
Yes.
It was interesting. I started doing my real look into South Carolina. I did some interviews today. And what an odd team in terms of production. Basically, their whole team is Spencer Rattler throwing to Xavier Leggett. That's it. They can't really run the football. They're not good at running the football. They don't have a whole lot of weapons receiving. You mentioned Juice Wells being hurt. They just don't have a lot of weapons. And if Mississippi State can shut down Xavier Leggett, it feels like that's half the battle solved right there.
I think it's Legette. Kwanzaa, whatever.
Well, I'll be honest. I did an interview with a South Carolina beat writer, and she didn't correct me. So I'm gonna assume that I could be right. That's true. It's a true story.
Yeah.
Need to go find that guy from the stadium the other day and change my answer.
All right. So hey, Dad, that you just went exactly where I wanted to go.
Yeah.
So Legette. Is his numbers this year. I mean, 22 catches, 367 yards, averaging 122 a game. And in 2 of those games against North Carolina and Georgia, basically Juice Wells was a non-factor. First half against Georgia, goes out with the injury, didn't play a lot against North Carolina. So he has produced even without Juice Wells on the field. But if you're Mississippi State, well, would you prefer to play South Carolina with Juice Wells and Legette or with Juice Wells sidelined? What does that do in your mind in terms of how Mississippi State covers and focuses on Legette?
Richard, I would like to tell you I think that they'll focus on Legette and shade the coverage over there towards him. But then I watch what they did to Malik Neighbors, and I don't really know if that's going to be the case or not. But when you look at this South Carolina team, if you go look at their stats, I mean, Legette has 22 catches. The next closest guy has 10.
Yep.
And he only has them for 65 yards. Legette has 367 yards receiving on the year. From a running standpoint, their leading rusher on the season has 75 yards. That's what That's what Jaquavius Marks had Saturday for Mississippi State. They have not been able to run the football. Now, Rattler, despite that, is having a really good year, right? He's completing 71% of his passes. He's only thrown 4 touchdowns, but only thrown 2 picks.
And one of them was like just end of the game.
Yeah,
you're down 2 scores, just throw it down the field and just see what happens, kind of.
This is a really, when you look at their stats, you're like, okay, I get why they're 1-2. But I don't know that I've ever seen a team this dependent on like 2 guys. It's almost like the rest of which is the thing that if you're a State fan scares the hell out of you, because that's where, the random guy just shows up who hasn't done anything all year and he finishes with 17 carries for 106 yards or, 6 catches for 85 yards and a couple of touchdowns. Somebody on this list here of guys is going to have to make plays for South Carolina to have a chance to win. Because if they just rely on Legette, they're not going to get there, I don't think.
Last week, notwithstanding, we know what State has in the front 6 and how effective they can be against SEC teams. Like, pretty poor last week. Not pretty poor. They were bad last week. But we've seen those exact guys produce against good teams in the past. They should have a field day with what South Carolina presents up front. They should have a field day on Saturday.
Well, it's one of my favorite things. It's the movable object and the resistible force. So we'll see who actually, can get it done. If State can't get pressure on the South Carolina offensive line, going to be a long, long season. I understand LSU's got a great offensive line. They got future NFL guys there. This South Carolina offensive line, North Carolina made them look like Swiss cheese. You got to be able to attack them. You got to be able to get pressure.
Jokes about Furman aside, I watched Furman control the line of scrimmage against South Carolina for a period of time before eventually they couldn't anymore because of talent and depth and size. But there was a time where freaking Furman was controlling the line of scrimmage against South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
So who do you circle in the line for State? It's got to be Jaden Crumedy, right?
Yeah, Crumedy and Pickering. Those are the two guys I'm going to have an eye on. If they need to be able to control that interior, they need to be able to. State should be able to get pass rush without blitzing on this offensive line. This might be a game where, Arnett had talked about going to a 4-man front. This might be a chance to do that in this game. Put an extra guy down there so you can get a little more pass rush without having to sacrifice a blitzer. Might be something they consider this week.
So Dowell Loggins is kind of a new name in the SEC. He's the new offensive coordinator at South Carolina. He was hired last December. And he came to South Carolina after being the tight ends coach at Arkansas. And this is a real test for him, right? Because so in the way that we've talked about Mississippi State and some of the issues they've had, it is now on Kevin Barbay's shoulders to scheme something that gives Mississippi State's offense a chance to have success. South Carolina's got to do the same thing, right? Facing a defensive line that's got a couple of dudes on it, not to mention the fact that the 2 best tackling linebackers in the SEC are on Mississippi State's roster, and South Carolina is down arguably its best receiver, not in terms of production this year, but in terms of career production. And so how is Dowell Loggins going to scheme things up for South Carolina to, one, protect Spencer Rattler and give him a chance to make plays because he's the most gifted player on that offensive side of the ball, and then 2, knowing that Xavier Leggett is at the top of Mississippi State's scouting report. Like, he is the focus. In the same way that last week Malik Neighbors should have been the guy that was like, this is the guy that can't beat us, Xavier Leggett has to be that this week, right? Yeah. Mississippi State defensively has to focus and go, this is the guy that can't beat us.
Isn't that a huge indictment if 2 weeks in a row the guy who can't beat you beats you? That's just not getting it done from a game planning standpoint at all.
Well, you're either dealing with somebody who is a different level of elite,
which I'll grant you with Neighbors. I might give you that. He's great.
Or
not with Legette, though.
You're dealing with a coaching staff an opposing coaching staff that does a better job of game planning. I mean, I think it's one of those two things, isn't it? Because don't you believe that that's what South Carolina is doing this week? They are trying to figure out, how do we exploit Mississippi State defensively? Who is our best player? It's Xavier Leggett. How do we scheme the ball into his hands in a way that he has a chance to make plays, even though we know the focus that Mississippi State has defensively is on him? And Mississippi State, in terms of building a defensive game plan, how do we keep this guy from beating us? Is Xavier Leggett going to end up with a bunch of one-on-ones like Malik Neighbors did last year? Because Mississippi State's defensive philosophy includes a lot of blitzing and some man coverage.